So far, we've established that to become herbal, Leeds will need to introduce something like a steady-state economy while connecting up and planting up those green corridors. It'll mean growing food in all sorts of unlikely places, but that's not a problem, as they're proving here in Todmorden.
The town is a Pennine mill town, about 15,000 inhabitants. You walk around the streets that you've always walked around, and you haven't really even noticed that there's this little spot with a bit of grass and there's some good sun there, and there's that little spot. We don't expect that a vast amount of food will be produced, but what we do expect is that people will see it and think, that's interesting, and start to ask questions and educate themselves. Traffic fumes, people worry about traffic fumes too much. It's mostly because there used to be lead in petrol, and there isn't anymore. It's free to give away, so it draws people in and it makes people think, well, what do I want? What am I getting? What is it? What do I do with it? How do I grow it?
But is it really feasible to scale Todmorden up to a city the size of Leeds?
Leeds is on relatively flat, relatively rich farmland. There's no reason why not.
And of course there is a farm here already, right in the very middle of Leeds.
We're a city farm, and the idea behind that is you're close to the inner city areas, you're providing services and information to the people that I believe most need it. This land has never been sprayed, it's always been organic, so we've promoted that since the 80s. People thought we were barking mad in those days, but now it's all gone kind of mainstream. We can grow vegetables here, but we try and show people how they can grow vegetables in their area, which may mean things like growing vegetables in pots or in bags or in tyres or going vertically instead of horizontally. So there's lots of different techniques that we can promote, and we have been promoting for years.
And there's a great example of that approach here in Hare Hills.
Most people said where we're staying, you can't grow stuff because the soil is not that thick that you can find, the kind of soil that you find out in the farms. We only got a limited amount of soil. But then we practiced and we started planting vegetables, and the first crop was potatoes. And we got a good harvest of potatoes and we enjoyed the potatoes. It was so nice getting fresh potatoes from the garden compared to the potatoes in the shops. We've tried now to make more space, so we started planting in pots, not realizing that we could get huge carrots in little pots.
It wasn't long before Iris and Josie were feeding a family of 4 through the summer months from a shaded plot a few metres square, right here in the densest part of Leeds.
It makes you feel like you're living out in the countryside, so you can enjoy the things from the countryside in the city.
Hare Hills is just one of a number of areas in Leeds where urban gardening is being actively promoted, including by the NHS.
Obviously, it's physical activity. It might not be necessarily the same as going to a gym, treadmill, whatever. That doesn't work for everyone anyway. But being out in the open and eating your own food, there's just so many things that you could benefit from.
They've been recruiting street champions to help the newbies.
The street champions idea came from a project that I read in London, which is called Food Up Front. I think the scheme actually costs £20 to join, and for that amount you get seeds, you get support, but mainly you get the person who has a little bit more knowledge than you have. It's not the same reading it from a book or reading it from the internet as if you have somebody, a gentle-minded friend to come and help and have a look and tell you this is what you're doing wrong.
There's another unexpected example right here in the city centre.
The idea for Wellington Place was that we should turn this paralysed development site into something greener in every way, that it would be better for the environment, better for people's quality of life in the surrounding office and residential blocks. And I said, well look, here we are on this 22-acre site. Couldn't we do something a bit different here? And I'd love to see allotments in the middle of Leeds. So they planted about 200 saplings and the biggest lawn in central Leeds. And then these 20 sort of vegetable growing boxes. We're hoping to open it up to people who live in the residential blocks around about and the people who work in the office blocks more. And MEPC quite rightly have had some publicity for it, and they're rolling it out in other cities as well where they've got sites, so that's really good news.
Cities are of course chock-a-block with potential temporary allotment sites.
What if you had forklift truckable raised beds? You'd have a metre square bed that you could use for a year or two and then move it when the time came to go.
I basically craned in pre-filled builder's bags with soil or compost in them, and then people can rent 1 or 2 of these, for example, as like mini allotments, crane the whole lot off, with the veg in there, still probably not suffering significantly from the journey.
We do already have 96 allotment sites in Leeds, but very few of them are within the main green corridors, so obviously we need more, and there are national initiatives working towards that. But allotments are not the only way people can acquire land for growing.
The massive untapped resource are gardens, and they have a number of significant advantages, certainly over allotments, but over other sort of undeveloped land, in that they are semi-secure. They also tend to be fairly good condition. A lawn is a very easy place to start. They all have water and they all have power and likely some shelter.
And people who have larger gardens like this that maybe they can't manage can always share with those who don't.
I'm thinking about garden share, and I'm also thinking about market gardening.
The most productive yielding systems are market gardens, much more sustainable than 100,000 hectares of a single crop managed by large machinery that's dependent on fossil fuels.
If you combine sort of half a dozen gardens in one street, that's enough work for half a week for a grower. The main other spots will be walls. If you totaled up all the south-facing walls in the city, you'd end up with hundreds of acres, and they're all a brilliant microclimate for growing tender or out-of-season crops.
And green walls and green roofs are not the only unconventional new approach. There's a whole host of new sustainable growing techniques which fall broadly under the term biomimicry.
Biomimicry is designing things that mimic nature. It's very interesting what you can do from an engineering point of view. You can engineer extremely clever systems that can, make water in the desert and grow things where you shouldn't be able to grow them. How important is it? Very important if it can be practically delivered.
I think in terms of intensive vegetable production, that practiced by the Ecology Institute, called the biointensive method, has been shown to be one of the fastest food production systems and sustainable from the point of view of not requiring any external inputs.
Permaculture says the best model of sustainability we've got is nature. Okay, it's got 3.5 billion years of R&D. Nature doesn't farm by clearing the land. Nature's always got the surface of the soil covered. So in permaculture you think, okay, how can we mimic that? So you can use mulches, you can use zero tillage. There's a whole series of mechanisms you can use. In particular, we use things like soil food web understanding. So how does the soil work as a living entity?
We probably need natural predator controls, which means that you probably are looking to be gardening in a wildlife-rich environment, although hopefully one without wood pigeons eating your brassicas. So you want a lot of small birds around, you want frogs and amphibians eating the slugs and so on and so forth. If you look at ecosystems, many people will say the more you know, the less you understand. And we don't know how a lot of it really works. So I guess to some extent we tamper with it at our peril, whether it is a tiny microbe or an eagle floating across the sky. Do we want it? Yes.
Other innovations include things like polyculture and partner planting, with perhaps the most comprehensive model being the forest garden.
Really what you're looking at in a forest garden is having something like 7 layers. So you've got a ground cover, you've got root crops, you've got small shrubs, you've got small trees, a large tree, you've got climbers in between and possibly bees and other things that run through it. Really what you're trying to do is mimic a young woodland. You would aim to have your hard fruits, soft fruits, some vegetables, self-seeding perennials, herbs. The initial results over the last 20 years have been that I think we can produce very high-yielding systems.
These very technical, low-impact, high-yield systems may in time replace conventional forestry, horticulture and agriculture. But as they usually involve only minimal digging and locally sourced mulch which saves on trips to the tip, then they should catch on quite fast in spite of some slightly unconventional ideas. One system, hugelkultur, involves burying whole logs and letting them rot in the ground. You don't get much more low impact than that.